Have you ever heard of something called a French tack? And what about a chain stitch tack or a regular thread tack? If you've heard of both, then you are ahead of me. I just learned about the French tack. If you have no idea what I'm talking about as far as a tack, then you'll want to stay tuned because tacks are super helpful in keeping things in place without it looking so intentional. We use them all the time in theater, and that's what we're going to be talking about today for this week's Tricky Thursday. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha Camacho. I'm the owner of Creative Costume Academy. I just love to share all of my tips and tricks that I have learned over my 20 years plus professional experience making costumes for big theatrical productions. Most people refer to me as your pattern nerd friend because I call myself a pattern nerd proudly, because I love the power that pattern making brings to any project, to anything that you're making 2D into a 3D form. My mission is to eradicate this weird stigma around it, that it has to be hard and that not everyone can learn it and it's only for a special few. Not the case, my friend. So I talk about pattern making a lot here on this channel, but today we have something special. Today for Tricky Thursday, I want to talk about tacks. I know, such a tiny little thing, but they can be really handy. Most of my life, whenever I have done a thread tack, and I'll explain what a tack is in a minute, hang with me. Most of the time when I have done a thread tack, I've just used a regular chain stitch, which is a really super handy stitch. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that today. I recently learned that there is something called a French tack. So some of you may remember, some of you maybe of a certain age, might remember those fun friendship bracelets that I learned about them back when I went to camp, like YMCA camp. We made friendship bracelets with embroidery floss and we had like all the strings and we tied the knots in the middle. So that's basically what a French tack is. There are pros and cons to both versions. And if you're still wondering what the heck I'm talking about as far as a tack, don't worry, we're going to show you. But what it is basically it's a string of thread. If I was going to tack this sweater to my top, let's say, I could stitch it with the sewing machine and it would be, we call that hard stitched. We stitch it directly to the garment and then it's not gonna move, but we don't typically, or sometimes this will work, but we don't always use this in theater because as you're moving around, we want it to look like maybe it's not attached to my top. So there's a way that you can connect these two pieces with something called a tack, a thread tack, to where you have a little bit of space in between the garments. So there's a little bit of thread that's connected to the top, and then there is an amount of thread, usually like 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch. Sometimes it's used on skirt linings so that your skirt lining will stay at the side seam with your outer fabric, but it won't have to be hard tacked down because as you move, things need to, see, as I'm moving, you can see that my sweater's kind of moving with me. So if I had just a little tack, a thread tack there, then you would still get that movement. But if I started like going crazy like this, because don't we always go crazy? Like, I mean, if I needed a dance break or something, it's fine for everyday life. But if you're on stage, we don't want that to look messy and sloppy. So we might use something called a thread tack. It's just a little bit of space in between two garments, usually. It's 2 layers, usually used in like a lining layer or sometimes on a collar to hold your collar down so your collar's not flipping up. Those kinds of things. Because in theater, we're always trying to make it look perfect. And so we have all these little hidden tricks. I actually have a Tricky Thursday that I have taught how to do the chain stitch, but when I discovered this French tack, I really wanted to share this as well. I'm gonna take you over to the table. We are going to see exactly how to make a chain stitch thread tack and a French tack and what the difference is between those. So the next time you're in need of maybe holding something in place, that you will know exactly how to do it and which one is going to work best for your project. Let's go over the table and check it out. I wanted to show you a real example of how or why I might use a swing tack or a thread tack, like I was mentioning. I'm using yellow thread because I'm not actually going to keep these tacks in, and I want you to be able to see But let's say this garment was going to be for stage, or you just want to make sure that your collar never moves on you. You could put a tack over here, because this is the kind of situation you wouldn't want to just have like a stitching line go all the way through, unless you do, and that's totally up to you. But when you do that, it looks a little bit unnatural because it's pushed flat onto the garment, whereas this would normally kind of move with the garment as you're wearing it and look more natural. So in this case, maybe you would put a swing tack or a thread tack like right here with a little bit of space in between, so it still let it look like it wasn't tacked down, but it's not going to flip up in the person's face and, you know, maybe get in their makeup and whatnot. And another place you might want to do it is maybe at the cuff. You know, if this cuff could possibly turn inside out or something like that, then you may want to put a little bit of a thread tack here. Yes, you could like stitch in the ditch and anchor this down, but then it almost looks like it's part of the sleeve and not a separate cuff. So these might be two different instances where I would use a thread tack or a swing tack, they call it as well. And so I want to show you these two different versions so that you can see. Now let's do the regular chain stitch thread tack, and you would pick where you want to put it. So in this case, because we have these buttons and this double-breasted, I wouldn't want to put it right here at the corner. If you had something that had a center front opening, you probably could get away with that, but I think it would be a little bit more natural, maybe more off to the side. Really, you can put it wherever. But if I flip this up and kind of give myself a point so that I know where I'm going with this thread tack, and I'll do it on the collar as well, then I don't have to worry so much about remembering and lining it up exactly. Plus, you're going to have a little bit of space, so there's that as well. Now, you want to start, I have a needle threaded, and I actually have 2 threads doubled, so I have 4 strings of thread, because the whole point of this is to make it a really strong section of thread that's going to hold these 2 pieces together, and you want it to be very strong because it will be getting some movement and some pull. So I would start on maybe the collar side in this case, and I would just take a little prick of the fabric and pull it through, and then go one more time. And here's how you do a regular chain stitch. So before you just pull it all the way through again, I am with 2 of my fingers going to hold this loop open, and I've kind of let go of the needle. I'm not kneading the needle right now, but seeing how this tail of the needle is there, I am going to, with my 2 fingers, pull that through the loop and pull it tight. And I'm going to just keep doing that over and over again until I get the length. So I'm going to do that. So that's all it is. 2 fingers through the loop and pulling it through like this. And I'm kind of letting the tail do what it wants, but you can see, I'll do a little bit more. And you determine how long you want this chain stitch to be. So I've done a couple. You can kind of see how it's creating little knots. So it's making that bit of thread be more strong. And that's the whole point of it. So this is about 3/8 of an inch. That's about how big I would want my thread tack. You can see it there, how long that is. And you could go a little bit longer. It depends how much movement you want to give this tack. But I probably wouldn't go too much longer than that for this example. So once you've decided how long that thread tack is that you want, then you can pull your needle all the way through and close the loop. So you no longer have a loop anymore. So now you just have your thread tack. And then you can take a little pinch of the other side where you are sewing it to. So I have marked that with my pin already. Take that and hug it down. And you see how I've got that separation. Now, once you've gotten it to the second piece that you're anchoring to, then I usually go back through that last knot a couple of times and anchor it to this base that I'm anchoring it to. And then once you feel like that's anchored pretty securely, then you can pull it through and maybe tie a knot here or tie a knot on the other side. I'm just gonna do a quick loosey-goosey knot because I'm going to be taking this out, but I wanna show you what it's gonna do. So that is your regular swing tack. Notice how there's still space, there's still separation between the collar and the body. But if you look, there is just that little bit holding it in place. So while this side, if I was jumping around and doing this, collar could be doing this on me, but this will never do that because it is anchored down, but it doesn't look like it's anchored down. So that's definitely strong enough. I have definitely used this style of swing tack, this chain stitch swing tack, several times in my career, and it works just fine. But I want to show you this newly discovered French tack, which I think is also very handy for other reasons. So same thing, you want to have maybe 2 strings of thread doubled, so you have 4 layers of thread, and then put your knot at the bottom like usual, like anytime you would hand sew. Let's say we want to do a swing tack right here to maybe where the top of the white is, or maybe about a 1/4 inch down from the top of the white to where it meets on the sleeve. So again, I'm just going to mark those 2 positions so I know where I'm sewing to. Then you're going to start very much like we did before, where you take a little pinch of the fabric on the one side, and then I'm going to just take another pinch just to make sure I've really got it there. Then this is where it gets a little different. So instead of creating the knots up to the length that you want, instead you're going to go ahead and grab the second bit. And just so you know, it doesn't matter if you start with one side or the other. It just depends on where you can maybe hide your knot more easily, is what I'm always thinking of. So instead of creating your knots to get the length, you go ahead and set the length of what you're trying to achieve. So I think that looks like a good amount. And if you had to go with a certain measurement, like 3/8, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, whatever it is, you set that length to start. And so I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times. So I'm going to go back here, but I'm going to leave that length of thread because that's how long I want this French tack to be. So this would be the French tack. So I'm building up a base, basically. So that's the base of my tack. Then this is where your friendship bracelet knowledge will come in handy. So again, I've let go of the needle, and in this way, you're going to create a 4. So thinking of the base, and this is your 4, right? I'm creating a 4 with that loop. Then I'm going to go around and go through, so go around the base and go through that 4 over there, creating a knot. And you're going to keep doing that. You do want to go in the same direction every time. So again, I'm creating the 4, I'm going under or around the base that I created, and then going through that hole of the 4. And you just keep doing that, building those knots on top of each other. So I'm going to do that, and we can see the difference. So you can see those knots, see how the little knots are kind of starting to twist and spiral. And if you did ever make friendship bracelets, you'll know that they did the same thing. But notice how thick this base is. And the other thing that's really great about doing a French tack as opposed to the chain stitch tack is that you already have a predetermined length. You've already set up that base to be the length that you want. So it's just making a sturdier tack with a predetermined length. So it's just a little bit different. And then you can go ahead down here and knot off like you would. Like I said, I'm not going to do a hardcore knot because I will be taking these tacks out of this garment. First of all, I don't think I need it because this is a garment that I wear all the time and it doesn't fit me that way. But you can see how it doesn't look like it's hard stitched down, and it gives it some movement there. And the other side, I could, flip this over if I was doing a lot of dancing or something like that I was worried about looking sloppy. But here, where that tack is, it's not likely to happen as easily, but it still will give it some movement. Here again, just get a closer up look. This is what the French tack looks like. It's a bunch of little knots going in a slight spiral where you build the base first. And that swing tack, chain stitch style, is where you attach it to one side of the base. You still have knots. It's still a bunch of knots on a string, so reinforcing that length. But you have to kind of determine the length. And instead of having that whole base anchored back and forth, the knots are creating the thickness, and then you anchor it at the bottom only. So I feel like if you wanted to make sure it was really sturdy and really in there, that the French tack would probably be a beefier tack to go with. But both of them are great, and both of them have worked well for me in the past. So hopefully this is helpful to you as well. So pretty cool, right? I mean, I don't know. I just think it's a really neat way. It's more secure. This whole French tack situation, it reminds me back in the day making friendship bracelets when I was a kid. And it's just a way to stay a little bit more accurate possibly, but you now know both versions. So hopefully they will come in handy for you. That's all we have for you this week, but I hope you come back, and you may have noticed that I do a little special video for you every Thursday. We call that Tricky Thursday around here. If you enjoyed this version of Tricky Thursday, I hope you will subscribe to my channel so that you always get the latest video updates and the latest tips and tricks, and make sure you turn on those notifications so you know exactly when the new video will drop, because I am giving away all the goods around here. As I mentioned before, I am your pattern nerd friend, so typically my most passionate subject I like to talk about is pattern making. I love pattern making. I know that some people find it hard, or they think that it's not for them. They can't learn it for whatever reason. They've tried it in the past. You've tried the books and maybe it doesn't work for you. We didn't talk about pattern making today, but pattern making and sewing, come on, they go hand in hand. So I got to share some of those sewing tips as well. But if you would like to learn more about pattern making, or you're just curious about my method, I invite you to check out my free pattern masterclass, completely free. It's a 3-part video series, and you can check out my method, try it out for free, learn the very first principle, which is a third of the knowledge to even do and make any of your own patterns in this free class. That link is below, and you can sign up for free. If you already know you love pattern making, you already have been following me for a while, and maybe you're ready to actually dive in and start making your own patterns, I would love for you to check out Pattern Making Academy. Pattern Making Academy is a very affordable way to learn pattern making. It follows my easier method. Most people find it easier. We start with the foundations, and then we go into making garments from beginning, from the sketch, from figuring it out in the pattern, through to even getting a new hack every time. And then in the end, we also do an order of construction, because when we make our own patterns, we don't get instructions, right? In Pattern Making Academy, we got you covered. And if you want to learn more about that, check that out down below. That's at learnpatternmaking.com. Well, that's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.